the creaking of weathered wood, and the distant cries of gulls painted an idyllic image of life at sea. Yet, for many who lived during the brutal era of piracy and naval warfare, these sounds foretold unspeakable horrors. Maritime punishments were as cruel as the waves were unforgiving. They served as tools of discipline and symbols of fear. Among the most infamous of these were practices like keel-hauling, flogging, marooning, and walking the plank, acts designed to instill terror in those who dared defy the rigid codes of shipboard life. Keel-hauling, a punishment notorious for its sheer brutality, was a method of enforcing discipline that struck terror into the hearts of sailors during the 17th and 18th centuries. Originating in the Dutch Navy, it involved dragging a sailor beneath the ship's keel, the barnacle-encrusted underside of the vessel, from one side to the other. The ordeal was often fatal, with survivors left scarred, broken, and vulnerable to deadly infections. The practice was first documented in 1622, when Pilgrim Willem, a Dutch sailor aboard the Hollandia, faced keel-hauling for striking his captain. Though he miraculously survived, his story became a chilling reminder of the dangers of defiance at sea. By 1629, the Dutch Navy had formally codified keel-hauling as a punishment under their Articles of War, employing it for serious offenses such as mutiny, theft, and insubordination. For over 2 centuries, this gruesome ritual remained a cornerstone of Dutch naval discipline. The process itself was as meticulous as it was horrifying. The condemned sailor, stripped naked, was bound with ropes and weighed down to ensure submersion. The crew then dragged him across the ship's hull, where sharp barnacles shredded his flesh, often leaving deep, jagged wounds. The act served as a public spectacle, forcing the entire crew to witness the punishment as a deterrent to future transgressions. The spectacle also reinforced the captain's authority, ensuring that no one dared challenge the chain of command. Keel-hauling's terror was not confined to Dutch waters. In the 18th century, Peter the Great of Russia adopted the practice as part of his efforts to modernize the Russian Navy. Sailors were keel-hauled in icy waters, where they endured both the agonizing scraping of barnacles and the numbing chill of northern seas. Meanwhile, the British Royal Navy and the French fleets refrained from officially sanctioning keel-hauling, deeming it excessively cruel. Nevertheless, the threat of such a punishment, even if rarely implemented, loomed large over rebellious crews, a grim reminder of the power wielded by naval authorities. If keel-hauling was a rare but extreme punishment, flogging was a routine and deeply feared aspect of maritime discipline. The cat-o'-nine-tails, a whip with 9 knotted cords, left sailors with torn flesh and scars that marked them for life. The term cat first appeared in the late 17th century, but the practice itself dated back centuries. The British Royal Navy officially sanctioned flogging under the Articles of War in 1661, and captains wielded it liberally. Offenses ranging from drunkenness to theft and mutiny could earn sailors dozens, or even hundreds, of lashes. In 1797, aboard HMS Hermione, Captain Hugh Pigot's excessive use of flogging pushed his crew to mutiny. After witnessing a man whipped to death for failing to furl sails quickly enough, the crew retaliated by killing Pigot and several officers. Pirates, contrary to their lawless image, also employed flogging to maintain order. Bartholomew Roberts, better known as Black Bart, included flogging in his pirate code. Sailors who struck a fellow crewmate could face Moses' Law, 40 lashes minus 1. Edward Lowe, a pirate infamous for his cruelty, once used a cat soaked in brine to flog a prisoner, ensuring excruciating pain as salt entered the wounds. The psychological toll of flogging was as severe as its physical effects. Sailors dreaded the ritual as much as the punishment itself. Victims were tied to a mast or grating, their backs bared to the watching crew. Ship surgeons were often present, not to prevent the punishment, but to declare when the condemned could endure no more. Samuel Leach, A sailor who served in both the British and American navies recalled the oppressive silence that hung over the ship on days of punishment, likening it to the calm before a storm. Marooning was one of the most harrowing punishments in maritime history, reserved for those who committed grave offenses such as mutiny, theft, or insubordination. Condemned individuals were abandoned on desolate islands with only minimal provisions, typically a pistol with a single shot, a small amount of water, and perhaps some bread. This grim practice was not merely punitive. It was designed to ensure a slow, agonizing death by starvation, exposure, or despair. The isolation turned the punishment into a psychological torment as much as a physical one. The origins of marooning are shrouded in mystery, but they can be traced to the early days of piracy and naval discipline. The term likely derives from the Spanish word cimarrón, meaning wild or runaway, and pirates soon adopted it as a fearsome tool to maintain order and enforce loyalty. Pirate Captain Bartholomew Roberts explicitly included marooning in his pirate code, stipulating that anyone who betrayed the crew would face this terrifying fate. The looming threat of abandonment in a hostile wilderness ensured obedience among his men. Among the most infamous cases of marooning was that of Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish privateer who, in 1704, found himself stranded on a remote island off the coast of Chile after disagreements with his captain. Remarkably, Selkirk not only survived, but thrived for over 4 years until his eventual rescue. His extraordinary tale inspired Daniel Defoe's classic novel Robinson Crusoe, transforming a grim punishment into a story of resilience and adventure. However, Selkirk's survival was the rare exception. For most, marooning led to lonely, painful deaths, their suffering unwitnessed and their stories lost to time. The practice was not limited to lesser-known figures. Edward Lowe, infamous for his cruelty, marooned entire crews on barren rocks with no hope of survival. In 1722, he left the crew of a captured Portuguese ship on a lifeless outcrop, ensuring their doom. Even Blackbeard, the notorious pirate, marooned dissenters from his own ranks on sandy spits in the Caribbean, a chilling reminder of his ruthless authority. For pirates and sailors alike, marooning was a fate that embodied the unforgiving nature of life at sea. Walking the plank remains one of the most iconic symbols of pirate cruelty, though historical accounts suggest it was far less common than popular culture portrays. This punishment involved forcing captives or mutineers to walk off a narrow plank extending over the sea, often into shark-infested waters. Pirates understood the power of spectacle, using this dramatic execution as both a form of entertainment and a warning to instill fear and maintain control. The phrase "walking the plank" first appeared in print in the early 19th century, but evidence suggests its origins date back to the golden age of piracy. Dutch pirate François l'Olonnais, notorious for his viciousness, reportedly forced prisoners to walk the plank after torturing them to extract information. This gruesome method of execution added to the aura of terror surrounding pirates of his era. Edward Lowe, another infamous pirate known for his unparalleled brutality, embraced the plank with characteristic cruelty. In 1722, Lowe captured a Portuguese ship and ordered its captain and crew to walk the plank after they attempted to conceal valuables. Witnesses described his sadistic pleasure in extending the torment of his victims, cementing his reputation as one of the most barbarous figures in maritime history. However, not all victims succumbed to their grim fate. In a rare instance of survival, the mutinous crew of the British merchant ship Betsy forced their captain to walk the plank in 1769. Remarkably, he managed to cling to floating debris and was later rescued by a passing vessel. Such escapes were the exception, as most victims were doomed to drown or fall prey to the unforgiving ocean. Despite its infrequent use, walking the plank endures as a symbol of pirate savagery, immortalized in literature and film. It exemplifies the theatrical cruelty pirates wielded to assert dominance, turning executions into performances that still captivate the imagination centuries later. For those who narrowly escaped death at sea, the gallows on land presented a fate arguably worse. Gibbeting, or hanging in chains, was a punishment as public as it was grim. Reserved for the most notorious criminals, this posthumous sentence encased the condemned's body in an iron cage and displayed it in a prominent location, near ports, crossroads, or busy towns, ensuring maximum visibility. The sight of decaying corpses swaying in the wind served as a chilling reminder of the dire consequences of piracy and lawlessness. One of the most infamous cases involved Captain William Kidd, executed in 1701. His body, gibbeted along the banks of the Thames, became a grotesque landmark for years, greeting ships entering London and instilling fear in sailors and citizens alike. Similarly, Charles Harris, lieutenant to the infamous pirate Edward Lowe, met the same fate. After his 1722 execution, his decaying remains welcomed sailors entering Charleston Harbor, a stark warning to all who dared defy maritime law. The practice wasn't limited to pirates. Under England's 1752 Murder Act, gibbeting became a widely used punishment for murderers, extending its grim spectacle beyond the world of the high seas. Public fascination with gibbeting grew despite its grotesque nature. Crowds gathered to gawk at the macabre displays, drawn by a mixture of revulsion and morbid curiosity. To some, it was a satisfying image of justice served. To others, a haunting display of human cruelty. As a tool of deterrence, gibbeting aimed to project authority and enforce the rule of law, even as Enlightenment ideals began questioning such brutal practices. Its grisly legacy lingers in folklore, literature, and museums, a reminder of a time when justice was displayed in iron and decay, swaying ominously in the public eye. The brutal punishments of the sea served as tools of control in an era where maintaining discipline was paramount. Life aboard a ship was often harsh, with crews enduring grueling conditions, long voyages, and the constant threat of mutiny or desertion. To enforce order and loyalty, navies and pirates alike turned to punishments that were as severe as they were symbolic. Keelhauling, flogging, and gibbeting were not just methods of retribution. They were public spectacles meant to instill fear and obedience, leaving physical and psychological scars that endured long after the wounds healed. For navies, these punishments were codified into law, serving as grim reminders of the consequences of insubordination or theft. Keel hauling, with its barnacle-encrusted horrors, was a particularly terrifying ordeal, often resulting in death or lifelong disfigurement. Flogging, with its multi-tailed whip, left sailors with lacerated backs and enduring trauma. Pirates, on the other hand, used punishments like marooning and walking the plank to enforce their own brand of brutal justice. These acts not only maintained discipline, but also reinforced the power and authority of their captains. As Enlightenment ideals began to take hold in the 18th and 19th centuries, public sentiment started to shift. The cruelty of such punishments came under scrutiny, leading to gradual reforms. Keel hauling was abolished in the mid-19th century, while flogging and gibbeting followed suit shortly after. These changes reflected a growing recognition of human rights and the need for more humane forms of discipline. Yet, the legends of these punishments endure, etched into the lore of maritime history. From the desolate despair of marooning to the grisly spectacle of gibbeting, they remind us of a time when the high seas were a place of both adventure and unimaginable cruelty. Reflecting on these tales, we are left to ponder the price of order in a world where survival often depended on fear.